I think we can likely expect a non-stop campaign of marketing and information about Dragon Age: The Veilguard throughout the summer leading up to its prophesied release sometime this autumn. And this is certainly the right thing to do if BioWare and EA aim to sell as many copies of the game as possible. It's true they got off to a rough start, but there was a developer Q&A the other day and a ton of info drops on various places on the internet, letting us know more about the game. As I've said in a previous video, I want Dragon Age: The Veilguard to do well, if only for the sake of my investment in the storyline of the world of Thetis, as well as for the sake of my curiosity for a potential future Mass Effect title. There are, after all, still core elements to both these franchises that I value, but in light of my recent video where I specifically addressed the Dragon Age Origins division with the rest of the Dragon Age player base, I later realized that this division is merely a reflection of a greater issue and trend beyond merely Dragon Age, and something that goes to the heart of BioWare and how they've evolved over the years. Dragon Age: The Veilguard is simply the latest iteration of a long-term evolution that has resulted in what one might regard as the greatest division within RPG circles. Now, all franchises and all genres have their divisions amongst the fans, be it film, anime, comics, and of course video games. But all in all, the divisions that exist within the broad sphere and genre of RPGs tend to be fairly mild and rarely overly vocal or destructive. For example, whilst many people from old-school Bethesda games might prefer Morrowind and Oblivion over, say, Skyrim in the Elder Scrolls series, few people are inclined to attack each other over these differences or preferences. Likewise, Obsidian has produced many different games over the years, but fans are not tearing their hair out over which one is the best or attacking each other. You see, the ultimate source of all this conflict and division amongst the fans of the games that BioWare has produced is BioWare itself, through a combination of bad luck, poor decision-making, and intentional action, all of which has contributed to a distancing of some of their fans away from their games, with BioWare courting new fans with little connection to the old ones, and an unnecessarily hostile attitude from both the new fans and BioWare itself towards the old guard of fans who feel, and I believe justifiably so, written off by the new directives of BioWare as they had originally, through their support, built up the BioWare games with their wallets. Now, BioWare started off many winters ago, along with other oldies such as Obsidian, as a maker of RPGs, and quickly became one of the genre's greatest exponents. Without them, there would have been no Baldur's Gate 1, 2, or Throne of Baal, and as a consequence, no Baldur's Gate 3. These first titles really cemented their reputation early on. Then you have Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic, Jade Empire, Mass Effect, and Dragon Age Origins. Around this time, BioWare was uncontested in their mastery of the genre, and had drawn in a great many people because of the types of games they made. Games with deep stories, deep choices, mechanics, and complex mature themes. Beyond this, in many ways, BioWare was the first developer to really introduce meaningful companions to their games, with deep-seated interactions, and over the years they iterated upon this feature many times over. All of these different elements came together again and again, and created classics that people still play today. But then, things began to change, ever so slightly. The first and most noticeable change was from Mass Effect to Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2 was a much more streamlined experience than its predecessor, which did not make it bad, of course, but nonetheless, it was a lot less RPG-oriented than Mass Effect. And indeed, many people liked or even loved Mass Effect 2, but it was undeniable that it was a departure from BioWare's tried and true formula. Similarly, there were overlapping issues with Dragon Age 2 being more streamlined, and it's simply a fact that it was rushed out the door, having been made in less than 2 years, which seems to hint at a kind of potential interference from EA, something we'll come back to later. Then, of course, there was the Mass Effect 3 ending, and the very mixed Dragon Age Inquisition, which was, to be fair, commercially successful, but was received differently by a lot of people. And following that, to be blunt, you just have a long chain of misses and failures. Andromeda is nothing to write home about, putting it mildly, and then there were many issues. Anthem comes to mind. All the while, despite many people leaving or being fired, BioWare fans still held out hope for a return to grace. BioWare had, through their earlier achievements, earned themselves a loyal fan base, and so people waited. Their reputation kept the faith of the flocks. Now, a lot of people are heavily inclined to pin the blame on EA for all of BioWare's flaws and failures, and it certainly is the case that EA is part of the issue. But EA simply cannot account for everything, or even a lot of it. Much of the failure of BioWare can be laid at the feet of BioWare itself rather than EA. And now, after nigh 10 years of waiting, a new game is coming out. A continuation of the Dragon Age franchise, and probably more anticipated than any other game they have made, in part due to the very long wait. Some of this division I covered in my Dragon Age Origins versus everyone else video, but it is a broader issue, and BioWare, not the player base, has sown the seeds of this division amongst their fans, whether willingly or not. If this were a PhD dissertation, I could probably cover all the issues, but since it's not, I will limit myself to a few. As I've already mentioned, beginning with Mass Effect 2, there seemed to be a move towards streamlining, making the games, for lack of a better way of putting it, easier to play. Every BioWare game since Mass Effect 2 has been streamlined in this way, presumably because BioWare thought that it would make the games more accessible, and consequently more popular and enjoyable. But it's highly debatable if the streamlining that has taken place has really benefited the player base, or for that matter if it was truly desired by the player base. And I do hate to be the gazillionth person who brings this up, but it's not unreasonable to bring up the success of Baldur's Gate 3 in this regard. Baldur's Gate 3 literally lifted a set of rules from pen and paper Dungeons & Dragons and made it fun and enjoyable. And not just for old-timers and hardcore CRPG players, but for the new players as well. And whilst not everyone enjoyed the combat, the majority of people did, as evidenced by the countless number of build guides and videos on YouTube that persist to this day. Baldur's Gate 3 shows that mechanical streamlining is not at all necessary for a game to be popular, successful, and enjoyable. Quite the opposite. And it provides evidence that BioWare did not necessarily need to go down this route. Now, I will be the first to admit that Baldur's Gate 3 is primarily popular due to its companions, romances, and high-budget cinematics, and not due to its combat. But the turn-based combat did not turn off most people, and indeed many unexpectedly enjoyed it. Now, do I think this will change BioWare's mind on this? No, probably not. But it is strong evidence that you don't need to streamline a game in order to be popular, and even newcomers are open to so-called old systems. Now, another issue that's apparently controversial to discuss for reasons beyond my comprehension is the issue of aesthetics and beauty, specifically a move away from beautiful people. I briefly mentioned this in my previous video, but it warrants further discussion here. Over the years, BioWare has been moving away from what some people call conventional beauty standards to something else. Now, the term conventionally attractive itself is not controversial, and even people who reject it accept that that's a thing, and there's generally consensus on what it is to be conventionally attractive. And when you look at, say, the companions in Dragon Age Origins, virtually all of them, even the old ones you cannot romance, are conventionally attractive. Even Wynne, an old woman, does not look that bad. Alistair is handsome, Zevran looks like a Latin lover, and both Morgan and Liliana are beautiful. Now, if you fast forward to Dragon Age Inquisition, it's like night and day. Of all the companions and advisors, only Cullen stands out as conventionally attractive, with Dorian perhaps being a runner-up, and none of the female characters is conventionally attractive whatsoever. You need only compare them to Morgan or Liliana, or Liara, or Miranda, and I could go on. In the latest roster of companions, from what little we can glean from the limited reveals, it seems that, of the males, perhaps only Davrin and Lucanus de la Morte are conventionally attractive. None of the female companions are. BioWare even fundamentally changed the appearance of Scout Harding, not just to make her older, I'm aware that she's older, but to make her significantly less attractive. Perhaps with a fuller reveal of the companions, it will turn out to be otherwise. But for whatever reason, there's been a marked move away from conventionally attractive companions to something else. Again, we can turn to Baldur's Gate 3 as an example where the companions look much more in line with conventionally attractive standards, and the characters certainly look noticeably better than their Dragon Age counterparts, with a few exceptions. And arguably, Karlach, the ultimate muscle mommy, has possibly the prettiest of the faces, which might serve as a lesson for our Kunari companion. Now, some people will be incensed that this is even being brought up, but many of us play games to escape from the painful drudgery of life, to dive into a completely different world. Beauty, which is so rarely seen in our daily lives, elevates games and makes the characters in the games more appealing, and greatly amplifies the escapism people seek. The whole point of heroic fantasy is hyperbole, characters looking both well beyond average and performing well beyond average. And this shift on the part of BioWare away from the conventionally beautiful takes away from that, and it's shot through all their most recent games. Unless you think I am a lone voice in the forest on this, many people, male and female, of many different preferences and orientations, lament the loss of the conventionally attractive. As someone in my comment section recently wrote, "If I want to see average, I can look in the mirror or go outside. I'm here to escape." This move away from aesthetics, which has been knowingly and probably willfully implemented by BioWare, has further fractured the player base. And you honestly wish to tell us that it's all in our imaginations. Let me ask you one final question regarding this. Where are the desire demons? And where did they go? And finally, there's the issue of mismatch. We've been told that Veilguard is an appropriately dark setting, with many tragic surprises that lie in wait for us. And that may well be true, but art and style heavily contribute to that. And from what we've seen, it does not seem to suggest that this is the direction the game is going in. Yes, in Inquisition you did have some mature themes, but the cartoony art style heavily detracted from this. And even then, sorry to say, it did not reach the levels of Origins in terms of handling mature themes. Yes, it's all contextual, and the context of Inquisition was different from that of Origins. But is BioWare truly willing to treat and talk about the many topics they used to? This is particularly the case when we think about Tevinter and places like Antiva, which are potentially very dark places. Will BioWare make this a reality in the Veilguard? I don't know, and it probably is a bit too early to tell on this particular issue, and only the fully released game will reveal the truth to us on the matter. But if BioWare's direction thus far is anything to go by, I doubt it. Now obviously there are other issues, but I thought to bring up the most relevant ones. And all this would be perfectly fine were it not for a large contingent of BioWare fans that insist that either this has been imagined by those disappointed, or that it's irrelevant, or in the worst case scenario, people that harbor such thoughts are so stupid that they don't even understand the games they like to play. Yes, those people in fact do exist. Now personally I see no reason for such hostility, but I can potentially understand the source of it. Because BioWare games are as story-based and involved as they are, BioWare fans feel far more invested in them than, say, Bethesda fans do in Elder Scrolls. This naturally creates the potential for very strong emotions and sentiments towards the games, indeed genuine attachment. But ultimately, all this boils down to preference, and you can't really argue about taste. You can't argue, for example, that one person who likes pineapple ham pizza is wrong because real pizza is pizza margherita, or vice versa. I mean, you can, but what will it accomplish other than creating tension and hostility? Which is exactly what is happening with the hostility directed towards the older fans. The real issue is that people who argue for the more old-school approach are vilified for not accepting everything BioWare has decided to change over the years, as the expectation is that you must accept every change, or else in the best-case scenario, you are undesired as a fan, or worst case, outright wicked and evil. The reality is that the current BioWare is hanging by a thread of a reputation created nearly 2 decades ago, by people who are largely no longer at the company. And it was the older fans, the so-called complainers of today, that helped build that reputation for BioWare, and thus has contributed to their continued existence today. How's that for gratitude? And people can appreciate things, and not like everything, and have their criticisms, but it seems that in recent years, both BioWare and a certain contingent of fans view any criticism as fundamentally sacrilegious, and don't shy away from describing apostates in the worst of terms possible. It certainly doesn't need to be this way. People can appreciate the overall story of Dragon Age, and even the Veilguard, without finding the companions appealing, or the combat fun, and even, God forbid, talk about that publicly. And such people are not evil any more than the people who think BioWare games are flawless. It's just a matter of preference at the end of the day, and we all have a right to discuss those preferences. Thanks for watching. If you like my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.